A special thanks to our state co-sponsor, the Embassy of Bangladesh to the Netherlands, whose ambassador has graciously agreed to open this event. Above all, I'd like to warmly thank all of our speakers today, and I will start with a few ground rules before we get started. The event is being broadcast, excuse me, also on social media and will be available after the event on those platforms, which you will find on the registration page. We have had tremendous interest in this side event, for which we are grateful. We invite you to submit your questions through the chat function or indicate if you wish to say something so we can make sure that you are in a technical position to speak. There is a lot of interest and not a lot of time, so I will apologize in advance if we need to let anyone know that they are running out of time. Now, I shall introduce myself. I'm Melinda Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Initiatives for Gender Justice, and I have the privilege of moderating today's session. The issue of sexual and gender-based crimes against the Rohingya is an issue near and dear to our organization, and I'm honored to be among this group of activists today. The issues we will discuss today are of critical importance. With not one, but three justice processes operating at the same time for crimes committed against the Rohingya, the question of how sexual and gender-based crimes will be included is key. As with other events we have all organized together, primarily concerning the ICJ case, we firmly believe the best people to have that discussion, to raise the questions that need to be raised, and to tell us what is needed and what we can do are our Rohingya colleagues. Before we hear from them, I would like to invite the Ambassador of Bangladesh to the Netherlands, His Excellency Riaz Hamidullah, to make some brief welcome remarks. With that, I give the floor to you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Good evening from Den Haag. First of all, my sincere appreciation to all the collaborators in this virtual event, namely No Peace Without Justice, Amnesty International, Asia Justice Coalition, the Association Against Impunity, Burma Task Force, International Federation for Human Rights, Fortify Rights, Global Center for the Responsible to Protect, Global Justice Center, Human Rights Watch, Justice for All, Parliamentarians for Global Action, and the Women's Initiative for Gender Justice for coming together in this ICC side event on justice and accountability for the sexual and gender-based crimes against Rohingya people. As Bangladesh ambassador, while it's incumbent on me to underline Bangladesh's continuing support to the cause and to the well-being of the Rohingyas in Bangladesh, I guess I should underline a couple of key aspects a bit categorically. Justice and accountability should have been addressed by the international community together, much more resolutely, long before. There's no dearth of diagnosis before the world. The UN fact-finding mission brilliantly brought up the details of severe forms of violation and brutality in considerable detail, and that was undisputedly, and I underscore undisputedly. The crimes against women and children with categorical genocidal intent and atrocities committed against them was neatly established. Yet, 3 years passing, there's clear dithering to pronounce on it. If the international community fails to pronounce and act together and collectively, categorically, how would we secure never again? There's a question. There is a dominant view in Bangladesh, and Professor Imtiaz is here, he would certainly reflect on it later, that the international community has allowed to slacken the whole issue. And that's because of the state of play in global geopolitics. Now, the question is, can the international community be so selective and be indifferent? Is it also because the 1.5 million Rohingyas are not so valued a population or voiceless on their own? I know that these are difficult questions, but I think it's quite a time, and this is actually a dominant view if you walk on the streets of Bangladesh. By now, the crucial genocidal intent has been imminently established thanks to prima facie evidence recorded in the ICJ decision. All international community need to build on it here onwards in spite of the overwhelming circumstances that's arising out of COVID. Now, in the same vein, the national community, indeed including the global civil society, must stand unequivocally by the UN Human Rights Commission in its continuing work on the Rohingya atrocities. What we would say is that UN member states must support the work, not disrupt. As Bangladesh, we believe global civil society has a crucial role to play in this, in the whole scheme of things, especially the diaspora. Uh, we all must emphasize resolutely that as much as human right is universal, equally human rights cannot be selective. If not, it's only a matter of time when history and our posterity would hold us accountable. It's only fitting for me also to underline possible ramifications. Our denial or indifference or resolute action can create an unstable path for all of us. It is just not only for the Rohingyas. Whether the international community would let them subject to narrow and limited considerations of dominant geopolitics, or would stand up to the high values and principles that we profess to secure justice and accountability, um, I think the choice rests with us. Uh, Frankly, we're also appalled to see a kind of quid pro quo in international community. If I be more categorical, it's about we see that humanitarian aspects are coming up more, and that seems to be the comfortable, easier refrain than on the root causes, indeed on justice and accountability. Now, on all previous interactions with international civil society, Bangladesh did elaborate her commitment to resolutely prevent sexual and gender-based violence in armed conflicts. To us, it's a gravemost breach of international humanitarian principles. Over and over again, Bangladesh Prime Minister Excellency Sheikh Hasina underlined her stance on the Rohingyas and also why did she choose to open our borders. Uh, it was and it is a matter of value proposition for Bangladesh. She eminently recalled that during our war of liberation, when 200,000 women and children, girls particularly, were subjected to heinous sexual and gender-based crimes and tortured, and they were forced to take refuge across borders. Uh, so it's well known, documented how hosting over 1 million Rohingyas costed Bangladesh so much economically, ecologically, socially. Yet, international community seems to skirt the scenario in ensuring justice and accountability. I think that's again a very dominant and it's clear by now. For that matter, the question actually which is coming up very strongly is that what would have happened to the persecuted Rohingyas had Bangladesh not opened borders and opted to push back the Rohingyas? In nearly 1 decade, by standing for a cause as humanitarian as such, Bangladesh has eventually put her national interests at stake. We would therefore continue to stress that the perpetrators of widespread and systemic acts of violence committed against the Rohingya civilian population uh, for all the atrocity crimes are brought to justice and accountability. They're made accountable. It must not and cannot be a matter of option or choice. If we speak of shared responsibility, as did the Agenda 2030 emphasize, and as a matter of moral imperative, here is the most dominant issue. So I addressed my case here with these initial observations from Bangladesh side, and would be following what comes out from the, particularly from the Rohingya leaders in conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you for raising these points and providing an excellent framework for the discussion we will be having. With that, we will turn to our panelists, and we will be doing a question presentation in order to generate our discussion. Our first panelist for today, I keep saying morning because I'm in mourning, but I realize not everybody is, so forgive me for that. Our first panelist today will be Tun Kin. He is the president of the Burma Rohingya Organization UK. And my question for you is, you've not only launched the cases currently taking place in Argentina, you've also been following the ICJ proceedings very closely, including with your recent briefing paper on the provisional measures the ICJ imposed on Myanmar, their failure to comply and international inaction in that respect. Could you reflect on that situation and what it means in terms of sexual and gender-based violations? I give the floor to you.
First of all, thank you inviting me to join at this event. I would like to express many thanks to hosting this event, No Peace Without Justice, and other co-hosts. And very glad to see Honorable new Ambassador Hervis, and as usual, Honorable Leticia and Professor MTS and others. And regarding on the question, the situation in Arkan state, uh, you know, uh, during last 6 months, fighting has intensified. Actually, we have to see between Burmese military, the Temedor and Arkan army, and which has seen the situation deteriorated for all people in Arkan state. Burmese Rohingya organization has documented several human rights violations amount to crimes which constitute part of genocide against the Rohingya. In one village alone in Miao U township, which took place like 18 and 29 February, 8 Rohingya villagers, including 7-year-old boy, were killed by shelling and gunfire when Temedor used them as human shields during clashes with Arkan army. And again, on 28 and 29 February, we have seen that 5 Rohingya men were killed and 14-year-old boy were, taken from their homes and arbitrarily detained by the Temedor. Their relatives still do not know um, where they are. Actually, in Butidong Township, another 2 Rohingya children were reported to have been killed in early October when they were forcibly taken by the Temedor to act as human shields. They were part of a group of 15 Rohingya villagers forcibly conscripted, by the Temedor to guide soldiers through terrain believed to have been mined by the Arkan army. The 2 children were killed when, Arkan army reported ambushed the column of soldiers. We have to look at that provisional measures order was intended to protect the Rohingya. We have right to exist. If the government really want to protect us, it would have, also granted us citizenship, right to vote, and stand in the recent election. Instead, Myanmar still denies our existence and excluded us, from the election, entire population. Without that basic right to the citizenship as Rohingya in our name, our identity, we are still vulnerable to genocide. Myanmar also continues, to make life unbearable for Rohingyas in Rakhine State. They are trapped in their villages or in detention camp. It is a kind of slow death without access to livelihoods, not enough food or medical care. There has been going on for 12 years now, and people are struggling to survive. Genocide is ongoing as far as we concern, and also gender-based violence are really increasing, and it's much worrying in in eh, in a few months time, the way how Burmese military and Burmese security forces are, continuing killings, extrajudicial killings are continuing in Arkan state. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I had brief technical difficulties for a moment. Thank you very much for that answer. I've noted that our panelist Razia Sultana has not yet been able to join us, so I will turn now to Yasmin Ullah, an activist. Yasmin, I would like to ask you about the proceedings before the International Criminal Court. The crime charged there is forced displacement, as we know, for jurisdictional reasons. How has gender factored into, and what do we need to know about sexual and gender-based crimes, and what victims think about the ICC proceedings? And following with that, What is the number one thing we need to know about the impact of sexual and gender-based violence on these victims? The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think that there is a lot to be said about the current proceeding. There can be many different discussions on the sexual and gender-based violence. But the one thing that I would like to see, and unfortunately, I have yet to see the concrete manifestation of the current proceeding reflecting the things that I wanted to see. For example, the victims-centered approach, which would involve the prosecutor's office reaching out to the victims, reaching out to the advocates, and in a manner that it has to be to minimize the re-traumatization that is associated with the judicial system, judicial process, or the the crimes that is at hand. Now, with the limitations of the jurisdiction, I'm still quite unsure of how sexual and gender-based violence can play a part in this larger scheme of things. But I would hope that whatever happens, however the team actually takes this, in whichever ways, that the victims will remain the priority, and their well-being will remain the priority. The entire process should not minimize the empowering of the survivors, or we should not allow the kind of re-victimization or re-traumatization to take place, and engage people in the process. Here is some of the issues that I've found so far since the beginning of the proceeding. The one thing that I've realized when I had the opportunity to go on to visit the camps earlier this year, fortunately Fortify Rights was really helping me to get to Bangladesh. The one theme of speaking with the youth-led organization or the civil society groups inside the camps led by Rohingya was that there's very minimal understanding of the entire process. And I understand this is a huge burden, not only among the diaspora like us who have very little legal background, but also on the prosecutor's office or the International Criminal Court itself. But at the least, the advocates of the communities or the people who are involved in, actively involved in this process should have a better idea. It's not that the work has not been done at all. That's not what I'm saying. But the understanding, the deeper understanding of how they could participate, especially people who have been through extremely traumatizing situations, especially women who were mass raped. These people should be kept in a very, very safe circle, and should have the utmost understanding of how the process can affect them, and not just the effects of what we see now of whether or not we are going to have to be able to prosecute somebody to bring justice to people in a very narrow and shallow ways, but more of the long term. What would happen to these victims in a legal sense, but survivors, if and when repatriation becomes a topic again? How would these people be able to be repatriated? What is the reparation going to look like? And whether or not they're going to then be able to reintegrate themselves into a larger community of Myanmar. There's so many long-term questions that I have yet found answers. And I really, really hope that, since there have been some changes, some shifts in our understanding of, the gender roles, the, sexualities, a lot of the shifts around, what feminism actually is, and the intersectionality issues. The International Criminal Court, as an older institution, I feel may need to sort of move with the time and take these into the consideration. I understand there are a lot of limitations already, but if this case sort of falls through and we were able to be successful in a legal sense, but the victims are compromised, I I feel that my community as a whole will then be affected negatively, rather than us being able to actually use this as a launching point for us to be able to not only use this as a negotiation, but also a place for us to be able to rebuild. It should not be something that will come back to haunt us later on. And given that picture, there's a lot of insufficiency in the lack of psychosocial support currently in the camps for, not just the women that I referred to, but general public are not able to access mental health support. And a lot of these people that I've talked to oftentimes, expressed a lot of anguish, a lot of frustration around why aren't they able to seek help? Why aren't they able to, do the work and get things going and go home? And that's the frustration that's built up, and the average people don't even have access to the legal understanding, or to the people who will help them understand different aspects of this. Language barriers is definitely one of the issues that makes psychosocial support a lot less accessible, and the sustained efforts of doing that is still it still has a lot of question around it. And I just hope that within working with the complying with the prosecutor's office or the International Criminal Court, that we would seek to support the victims or the survivors a little bit more. And it might entail actually making the access, making the services available for everybody, because they're all essentially the survivors of the genocide that we're trying to seek accountability for. And the ways in which the gendered crimes have been committed was very much in line with the hegemonic power, which relies a lot on the patriarchal ideals to push the gender essentialism, and ensured that the fear tactics that they've played, the use of those strategies will instill the fear within the community, right? So the women were kept closer and closer to home as the time goes by, with the oppression that comes, by the military's perpetration. Now, when it not only kept women closer to home, but it also kept basically make men run out of options to keep the community safe, because that's their gender role. Now, this very clearly defined gender roles in order to break apart the community was basically part of the plan to finally execute the plan to get rid of Rohingya, as we all know it. Now, it's done in a pattern across many villages, and we all know about this, that in many townships and villages, the security forces will round up the men to later be murdered, and then to keep the women concealed in compounds close by to witness the murder, the slaughter of their own family members. And so the sexual and gender-based violence that Rohingya women live through are continuous, in a sense, that, like I said earlier, that mental health access is not quite readily available, or it's insufficient in a lot of ways, the agonizing effects of this is re-victimization, and sex trafficking, human trafficking is a huge manifestation of this. They are it's the effects of it have been really unique and really difficult to grasp in a lot of ways. A lot of people who are going through this, I think Fortify Rights just released a report about mental health just yesterday, and some of this was talked about. The pattern of the communal effects of the women feeling, fear and intimidation sort of slowly breaks apart the community. And this is not just, common within the Rohingya community. It's also very common in the Myanmar ethnic nationalities as well, by the same perpetrators. The idea of being able to get out of such situations or moving on with life is a little bit hard and difficult to wrap our heads around, specifically for the women who are currently living a very destitute lives in the camps, with not a lot of access, let alone mental health. There are so many other, plethora of things that they don't have access to. Specifically, for the past few months, there have been a lack of food rations, or the food rations are insufficient and for a lot of families, and this sort of led them to sign up for moving to the Basan Char. That topic I'm not going to talk about today, but it's all of this have sort of compromises the safety, the security, the livelihood, also the decision-making power, the human agency that one should have, and it sort of brings it back to what is available to them and what is not, and where our priorities should lie for the community. I really, really hope that whatever we do, whatever the international community considers important, will have victims, will have survivors, will have Rohingya refugees, will have Rohingya in general as a top priority, rather than what result can come out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. I have a quick follow-up for each of you before we turn to our next question. I will begin again with Tunkin. How would you reflect on the provisional measures? What are your thoughts on how that's going? And what should Myanmar be doing about the report to the ICJ? We know that the Gambia can comment on it. Do you think that should be public? I would appreciate your thoughts.
Is it me? You asking?
Yes, I'm sorry, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. I think that especially, when we look at the report's been already 2 times, we didn't see the report is coming out to the public. As a victims, it is very important we should see, the report is not, as a victim, we can see the ground, what situation is already happening, but the report, we do not know from Burma, but from Burma side, they kept it confidential. So how could we, as a genocide survivor for Rohingyas, for us, we have a right to have a look, the report, what the provisional measure as reports are submitting to the, International Court of Justice. And the other point, we can see that Burma, as I mentioned earlier, provisional measures they are really failing. What action international community should do in this way, because we have seen 4 months report, first time in May 23rd, another one is 23rd of November. It's been already 2 times, still genocide is ongoing. And is any chance, one thing we are calling here to prevent, to stop ongoing genocide, that is very important. That uh, is there anything can do from Security Council to move forward, to get the report and to submit the report, and also what kind of action Security Council could do, or any other chance? Like, I mean, we cannot see that much countries. We've been advocating to join International Court of Justice case against Rohingya filed by Gambia, but Gambia is a small country. We really need much more countries to join. We still today, as we talked earlier, like we just 36 Rohingya organization called to UK government to join the case and to support. So that can build a bit heavy pressure to the Burmese new government. I mean, NLD got more mandate this time. They won election, even though they excluded Rohingya. International community is still exclusion of Rohingya funded election commission, which is a racist election commission. So my point is, there is much more can be done from international level to pressure and to stop, genocides against Rohingya. Why still Rohingyas are, facing restriction in our current state? For example, one of my friend told me like a few days ago, he cannot go and see his grandma in another village. Security forces are really, you know, taking serious whoever tried to leave from the country in Butidon Township and in other sites of our current state that is going on. I just heard one from one person. So medical care restriction on medical care, restriction on education, all are ongoing there. Rohingyas daily life, they are facing it. So how many more years 600,000 Rohingya lives are at risk until today? How many more Rohingya need to be killed by the Burmese army, forced to take international community to take action? And, many Rohingyas thought that ICJ case after provisional measures, there will be a strong pressure or some changes may come. But of course, we know that as lawyers know that, but Rohingya, we try in our best to explain them what this case looks like, how long will it take, and we really need to more needed to educate Rohingya survivors in the camps. So one question here coming up is, end of the day, when these why Rohingya still cannot be repatriated back 3 years now? We appreciate Bangladesh government giving us a shelter and protection while Rohingyas are forced to flee from Burma. So one side, Bangladesh government is calling international community to join them to cooperate pressure to Burmese government. But unfortunately, still nothing moving forward. So current NLD government coming up in March, new government, the Aung San Suu Kyi led government have a strong mandate now. It is time that, I mean, especially like UK here, where we calling to join ICJ case, and European countries and US and other countries, ASEAN, a kind of more stronger pressure needed to stop and to restore the rights of the Rohingya. Then we can see repatriation, and then we can see repatriation can happen with safety, security, and protection, and also genocide will be stopped. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yasmin, a follow-up for you. Could you give us just a summary about how sexual and gender-based violence is reflected in the ICJ case, and how does the ICJ case empower survivors in your opinion?
I think that since last year, November 11, I remember that I was in The Hague and I met you, Melinda. I met the rest of the No Peace Without Justice team, and connected with a lot of people that now I really treasure the connection, and I'm very grateful to be able to be there on the day that the filing was done. And we had this similar question about, whether or not the sexual and gender-based violence would play a key role in the attempts to bring this case toward the ICJ, and we were reassured multiple times by the legal team that it would, and I think that we all had our skeptics, sort of like our questions, and some of them might not have been answered directly that day, but later on when it was in the court, during the sessions, during the hearing, I really, really appreciate the ways that the case was brought, and it talked a little bit more about how women were, subjected to the gendered crimes, and the the ways it played out in the court was that Aung San Suu Kyi was hearing those things at right there, and she would not be able to respond to it, and it sort of made me think that a lot of what Rohingya women have been through was that we've been silenced, as the Myanmar government made clear that they do not believe in our stories, through the ICOE report that was quite infamous in my opinion, that categorically deny that any mass rape or any sexual and gender-based violence took place, or that it doesn't have sufficient evidence, without actually reaching out to the victims or the survivors themselves. And so I think that the ways both the ICC and the ICJ cases are ongoing, I know that because the ICJ has a lot more jurisdiction and a little bit more a wider sort of things that it can cover, I hope that the sexual and gender-based violence will remain the key theme of all of this, because it plays such a huge role in destabilizing the community. And that is exactly the intent of the military. So many vivid details, so many things that come out of like victims' testimonies, and I don't think that I want to dive into that right now, but I think that the ways that the legal team had put it together and really research into the topics is really well done. But since we don't see the rebuttal, as Go Tunkin has said, we don't see the rebuttal coming from or the response from the Myanmar side coming or being made public, it's really hard to gauge where things are. But I still hope that with the kind of effort that they're doing in terms of the larger work to propel this case forward, that they will be successful. Now, I think that I sort of forgot your second question. Would you mind repeating that, please?
Sure. It was, you addressed how the ICJ case empowers survivors. It was about how SGBV is reflected in the ICJ case, and I think you covered that, but if there's anything you'd like to add specifically, please.
Perfect, thank you. One of the things that I've always said was having an institution, having a government believing in our story was really, really empowering. Not because we don't already know that it's the truth, not because we don't believe that it has happened and that it has insurmountable effects on us, but because our own government, the one that was supposed to protect us, did not, and still is not willing to believe us. That is the most empowering thing that an institution or a country could do for us, the people that have been rejected for the past few decades. It is really important for the psyche of the survivors. regardless of whether or not they're on the receiving end of a more traumatic, traumatizing events. If some of the people just witness the slaughtering or the rape and they just run, those are the people who need to be cared for as well, regardless of the amount or the effects, or we really can't really put a number or a measuring stick onto how traumatizing something could be for some people. And overall it's a communal effect, and the start of this and how it was really, really validating for us was that the Gambia decided that it was going to take action rather than sitting and asking other nations to, hey, let's do something, because that's been the trend, the global trend for the past many years, that something happens, something terrible happens, but nation states would just condemn, lightly put out statements, and really not following through. And so the how the Gambia rallied up support from other various nations, and the OIC, as well as Canada, as well as the Netherlands, all of this provides us as a different worldview and perspective of how our experience is the truth from the lens of the larger international community. And it's not it sort of help us to have a little bit of hope that maybe we're in a really, really dire situation, and it's really hard to look for positivity in this world while we're struggling really, really with really difficult lives. But at least someone believes us, and it's the Myanmar military or the authorities that have enabled genocide are not going to be able to run away from this with total impunity. There's someone that's holding them accountable, and they're being watched.
Thank you very much for that. For the second question, before we hear from Professor Ahmed and then from the audience, I would like to ask both of you the same question. You are here in a room, a virtual room, but a room full of people who care about justice and accountability. You have state representatives, civil society, academics, people who work at justice institutions, international organizations, and others. You both touched a bit on this in your last responses, but I will ask you again, what can we do, each with our own mandates, to support you in your work for justice and accountability for the crimes committed against the Rohingya, and especially, what can we do about sexual and gender-based crimes? Tunkin, we will start with you. You spoke a bit about what states can do, but I would ask you again if you could address what can we all do? The floor is yours.
Yeah, one thing for the international side, for this is important that making the reporting requirement public. That's why Myanmar's claim of compliance can be properly scrutinized and require that Myanmar grant, full citizenship of the Rohingya as part of to measure to protect us, and requiring Myanmar to cooperate fully with UN and other international investigation, including ICC and other Argentina case, the Argentina case, and supporting Gambia case follow the lead of Maldives, Canada, and Netherlands, open universal jurisdiction cases that is needed. And one more thing, a few more things I want to point out here. Most Rohingya actually don't understand detail of international cases. It is clear like grassroots participation in them will be limited. Justice at the grassroots level is still very achievable. Like achieving justice for mass atrocities will require that we listen to the Rohingya communities, who have been directly affected by the violence and displacement, to ensure that their empowerment as survivors remain at the center of all our work. That is very important. Rohingya will likely be in camp for many years. We never know because Burmese policy towards Rohingya is not changing at all. Instead, we're getting worse. So justice at this point includes like empowering Rohingya community through a kind of like comprehensive transitional and transformative justice programs, such as like through livelihoods, education, health programs, which build a grassroots and people-centered movement like to define and achieve justice at the most local level. International community and particularly like human rights donors and government should not shy away like cultivating the cross-border Rohingya civil society movement, especially like they should increase like dedicate funding, especially for Rohingya-led civil society and human rights groups, but those are established in the process of being established not only with the Burma, but like particularly among Rohingya refugee communities like Bangladesh, Malaysia, and diaspora further afield. It is clear that international community previous support for Burmese and ethnic human rights movement like at Thai-Burma border has given a whole generation of human rights activists the foundation to return and work their countries' ongoing development. Rohingya now find themselves in a similar situation that like Karen, Shan, and Kashim brothers and sisters found themselves like in like last 20 years ago. There are now only a handful of human rights donor government that actively support and cultivate Rohingya-led civil society organizations. There are, however, imagine grassroots Rohingya activists and organizations, many that are women and like youth-led, working on human rights advocacy, transformative justice, education, health, and other key issues that could benefit from direct financial support and broader network. A continuing lack of direct support to Rohingya-led group will only further disempower and prolong disenfranchisement of the Rohingya. As such, support is critical in building credibility and gaining equal seat at the table among power holders. Even civil society allies, like when that opportunity for engagement finally occurs. Also, like, many Rohingya students currently in Arkan state, important that they are not getting education, important that to provide them education pipeline from primary level to university level, including in the camps, refugee communities, Rohingya youth have hope for the future. Refugee primary and secondary school, uh, like especially intensive, like A level, high school equivalency, youth, adult civil education program for Burmese and ethnic human rights activists were a key factor, cultivating a whole generation of educated activists in Burma today. The enormity of situation the Rohingya now faces require that such a leadership and education pipeline re-establish and reconfigure that Rohingya ultimately have a fair chance at, to return to Burma with as a full citizen. That is very important. Also expanding opportunities like especially for Rohingya youth to participate university scholarship programs around the world. That is very important. You know, the nature of Rohingya genocide and widespread dispersal of Rohingya refugees and diaspora community necessitates a global approach, educational empowerment and leadership development for the next generation, as they will be the most powerful voices for the long term for the justice. Ultimately, this will be most effective way to counter Burmese government's serious attempt to disempower generations of Rohingya. You know, overall justice for mass atrocity will require that we listen to Rohingya communities who have directly affected. That's I want to point out. And including also women empowerment as a much more important for the Rohingya community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very helpful, very specific response. That was great. Yasmin, the same question for you. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Sure, please.
Okay. So the question is, you have among us now state representatives, civil society, academics, people from justice institutions, and others. What can we do, each with our own mandates, to support you in your work for justice and accountability for the crimes committed against the Rohingya, and especially what can we do about sexual and gender-based crimes?
There is a lot of work that are being done, like Ojunkin had mentioned. There are a lot of support, a lot of different ways that the international community, civil society, NGOs, everybody could participate in helping us. One very specific thing that I've been working on for the past few months was working with different civil society leaders within Myanmar as well as in the diaspora. And these are people from, from different ethnic communities in Myanmar, and very much young people. And we just convene every week, almost every week. And this is organized and sort of hosted by ALTSEAN. The amount of convening or the amount of knowledge that we've garnered by just exchanging with each other and learning about the mass atrocities that are happening around Myanmar and what the effects are in terms of sexual and gender-based violence, in terms of, destabilizing the communities. It has been really empowering in a lot of ways for me and for many of the participants in the project. Now, something similar to that effect will sort of propel a different narrative within Myanmar. And I understand, because we have a lot of limitation when it comes to justice and accountability in order to bring people together, because it's about winning or losing. It's very it's quite retributive and in a lot of ways. And when we think about reparations, when we think, not reparations, my apologies, when we think about repatriation, we cannot simply just move back to Myanmar and everything will be fine and dandy. There is a lot of trauma that is also involved in the returning to the place of origin, the prolonged period of internal or prolonged period of displacement, and this is actually a study that was my apologies, a paper that was written by Sri Wardana as well as Stewart on forced migration and mental health and prolonged internal displacement or return migration and resilience. They highlighted in one of the things that I'm quoting right now. It says social and cultural links established with the host community may be broken and compromised. Over-optimistic expectations in original migrants about returning home may not be met, and generations born in displacement may be adversely affected by moving to an unfamiliar place. So there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of element of reintegration that would need to come in order for people to safely, securely, but also providing the sort of return that people actually want. They want to feel a sense of home. They want the sense of self back. And that would not be established if we just move people over from one border to another. And it would require a lot more work on the ground inside Myanmar, specifically with the young people, because this is not, we all, I think, can agree that this is not going to end tomorrow. It is going to take years. Even the ICJ case will take at least 3 years. The ICC case, I'm not entirely sure. All of this will take a lot of time after the justice and accountability measures have been exhausted. What is next? Rebuilding of the community cannot wait 10, 20 years from now. And I've repeated this many times, but it has to start now. It has to start on the ground. It has to start inside the camps. It has to start inside the country. It has to start with, people building relationships and connections, and the investment in the connecting people and networking and making sure that people come together, and respecting each other is the most basic thing that you can support, as the international community in different capacity that you work, because it will inherently provide us as a ground to stand on, something that we can launch, something that we can work and build, as a solidarity and allyship among the larger community, that is Myanmar, because the problem comes from the Myanmar military and the authorities that are really enjoying their impunity right now with the power of the people and the power of the young people, young minds that are being educated, like Kotunkin mentioned earlier. We have a chance at this, and it would not directly come from the political change or the international pressure, but you have you have a lot of ways to help us in order to be able to achieve that. So I hope that helps. It might not be as specific, but I hope that you look into providing a little bit more support with the people that I've referred to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was another excellent response. Now we will turn to our respondent, Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, Director of the Center for Genocide Studies at the University of Dhaka. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to listen to excellent viewpoints of both Yasminullah and Tunkin. I know them for quite some time, and I share, wholly the viewpoints. There are a couple of things I just want to flag. The last point, I think it would be easy, Yasminullah's point about, investing, and that is difficult to change Myanmar, and that going back, can be equally difficult. I speak from experience, and of course also the experience of Germany. You see, much of it depends on how state reproduces hate, and that's a big one. If the state continues to reproduce hate, then you have one kind of societal structures. If the state then disowns that and transforms, then it's different. And I say this from the experience of Pakistan back in 71, or in the Pakistan period. We saw the Biharis, or the so-called Biharis. They were not all from Bihar, but since the Bihari community, the Pakistan military used to support them, there was a tremendous hatred between the Biharis and the Bengalis, and there were a series of riots actually. And during 71 genocide, the Bihari community, some of them actually played a role in favor of the Pakistan military. But right after independence, right after 71, the Bihari context is no longer there because the state did not allow the hate to continue. So now if you talk to any Bihari, not to mention the Bangladesh court also granted them, did not grant, they say no, they remain citizens of Bangladesh, although they opted for Pakistan. But the Supreme Court gave a judgment and say, no, they remain citizens. So what happens if the state transforms? And same thing happened in Germany. Look at the tremendous hatred against the Jews was there during the, bulk of maybe centuries. But I mean, if you look at the pre-Second World War, but after Second World War, and with Germany transforming, and if you look at Germany now, transformed, radically. And so, yes, you will find pockets of, that is, you'll find everywhere throughout the world. But overall, since the state does not sponsor anti-Jewish sentiments, it's gone. So what I think would be required from Myanmar is the state transforms, and that is something that we need to work. And so on that, I see the legal process are important, but keep in mind at the end of the day, it is political. It's a political issue. It's a political struggle. At the end of the day, Rohingyas are, of course, fighting for justice, but it's a political issue altogether. And that is where I think we need to focus in a very big way. Um, I'm not trying to say that that the issue of the legal issue that ICJ and ICC and Tunkin's initiative with the Argentinian court, they're excellent, and they should be built up. It should not be only Canada and Netherlands supporting the Gambia case. I think some of the European countries ought to come if they are only Netherlands has come, but some of other countries ought to come openly in favor of the Gambia case if they are serious about the issues of genocide. All these are absolutely should be done, and there should be a constant campaign to include more of this. But and here is the big but. Since it's a political game that we are working against Myanmar, and Myanmar is playing politics, uh, I would emphasize on four things that we need to do. One is we need to build, the first thing is pressure on Myanmar from all quarters, from all sides, from all kinds of people, from media people, from activists, from painters, from poets, from fashion designers, from serious political activists, name human rights activists, name any occupation you are in, you ought to be engaged and you ought to build pressure. So the poets ought to be brought in together, and there are extraordinary poets inside Myanmar, and I'm sure they would empathize with some of the issues. There are painters. They have a fantastic street painting is one of the big things in Myanmar, and I think they should be brought in. So as I said, all professions, that's pressure on Myanmar from all sides have to be brought inside Myanmar, outside Myanmar, inside South Asia, outside South, anywhere in the world. That is inside the UN bodies, outside the UN bodies, inside World Bank, outside World Bank. So that's the first thing, pressure on Myanmar. The second one is you need to build pressure on the investors. That's a key point. Those who are investing in Myanmar, and that includes not only China, that includes Japan, that includes India, that includes Singapore, that includes Thailand, and I can go on and on. That includes UK, that includes France, Korea. So some of these countries have strong civil society. Japan, India, they have strong civil society. Those are the areas that I think we need to work on so that the Japanese civil society and the Indian civil society can impress upon their government to decouple from Myanmar. And I've said in several occasions that the three countries, I think, which Myanmar somehow, and it's quite a contradiction, but they put the three countries into their, I always say, into their pocket. Of course, China is one of them, but also Japan and India. Now, India and China are not in good terms, but in Myanmar they are together. Now, this ought to be brought into the civil society of India. If and when Japan and India decouples from Myanmar, it would be impossible, and I can bet on that, it would be impossible for China to keep siding with Myanmar, because then China becomes the target of the entire world. And China is a key player, not to mention, because they are Security Council member, whereas India and Japan are not. But seeing Japan and India together, that I think is helping them to argue that why are you telling me the whole Indo-Pacific alliance is with them? So why are you telling me? So that is where I think we need to work on. And as I said, because Japan and India, they have strong human rights activists, strong civil society, strong media. That is the place that we need to really work so that they would bring pressure to their government so they can decouple. The third thing that we need to do is, as you build pressure on the investors, keep in mind uh, you want to actually you need to really get into it's kind of a homework that one has to do. Who are the investors and what is their role in their respective countries? And I mean, this is almost a micro level work, but I see no other way to do it. So if there is a company, that company ought to be brought into the public and make clear that, look, this is a country which, you know, on under all the you know the kind of reports that have come out that they have committed genocide. At least one can say that there is a provisional judgment in the ICJ which tells that there is a genocidal intent has happened. There is a case in ICC. There's a case in Argentina. So you need to have this micro thing. At the macro, you decouple Japan, India. That's the macro one. But you need the third one would be the micro one, and there you need a lot of homework and a lot of people to do that. And the final thing which I want to emphasize, and it's good that we see Tunkin and Yasminullah, they're all working. And I saw the declaration, the 36 organizations, telling UK what to do. But it's high time, and both Yasminullah and Tunkin knows about it. It's high time that there should be a political organization of the Rohingyas at the international level. They need to bargain with the UN. They need to bargain with World Bank. They need to bargain with UK. This is important, because what is happening now, whenever Myanmar talks about it, they would always talk about ARSA and give a bad image to the Rohingya, saying, "Oh, this is a militant group. This is, all these militants in etc." And of course, if you color it with religion, then it becomes also saleable in some places. So my last point would be that is needs to be, and 36 organizations coming together is, believe it or not, is a positive step, it's the right direction. Now with the webinar, and this is the pandemic and the technology that has come up, and the way we are talking now, you can see 3 years back, nobody would have thought we could do something of this kind. Technology was there, but pandemic has really brought us to a virtual reality, which is absolutely solid. This has to be brought in. So I see no reason why they can't form a solid organization, and it can be on a basis of rotation or whatever, the leadership. That I think will give a signal to Myanmar that now they have to deal not with Bangladesh. You said dealing with Bangladesh, we don't have problems with Myanmar, to be honest. Rohingya is an issue, but bilateral relationship has always been good. Trading relationship has always. We don't have any animosity. Bangladesh really doesn't have any enemies, so to say. We have a development without enmity. So it's an issue that Myanmar will know very well, that they have to deal with the Rohingyas. That will push them to a point of not only, you know, uh, thing of repatriation. No, repatriation is just one of the issues. Yes, it's a big issue, maybe, but that's one of the issues. The biggest issue is how they change the laws, how they allow the identity which has been recognized by the ICJ already. The ICJ has recognized the Rohingya identity. It's an issue of identity. It's absolutely an issue of identity. And that is the fundamental thing. Once the Rohingyas get the identity, once they get the citizenship, I see no reason why repatriation from not only from Bangladesh. Don't forget, Rohingyas are there in 19 countries throughout the world. Yes, from some countries they may not return, I can understand, but they must have the opportunity to become the citizen of Myanmar, which is their homeland. So, I think these four things, including the legal sort, ought to be brought in for justice, something I think the world is looking forward to it. And I'm sure a good number of people, even inside Myanmar, who would probably side with some of the things that we are saying, but we need to encourage them to come up.
Thank you very much,
Also,
Professor. Before we turn to our concluding remarks, I would ask that if you would like to ask a question during the question and answer session, that you either put it in the chat now, which we will monitor, or indicate with your raised hand that you would like to speak. If you are not sure how to raise your hand, I am looking, I believe if you hover over your name, nope, that's not it. The raised hand function, Allison, do you have indication of how to raise your hand? I'm not seeing it on mine. Aha.
Going to look for it. In the meanwhile, I can put it in the Q&A box or the chat box.
Yes, I've just noticed if you minimize your chat at the bottom of the list of participants, you should see a button for raise hand. So either use the chat or raise your hand, and following the concluding remarks, we will begin question and answer. And for now, I will turn it to Ambassador Letitia van den Assem, independent diplomatic expert and the previous Dutch ambassador and member of the Advisory Commission on Rakhine State, chaired by Kofi Annan. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, and for having me in this group today. I really appreciate it, and to see so many friends amongst the panelists with whom I've worked before and for whom I have such very high appreciation and respect. Just a quick couple of points, some emerging from the discussion and to others. First of all, related to, I think it was Toon Kin and Yasmin both, who mentioned the importance of education. And I couldn't agree more. And I think it's important that we make an appeal to Bangladesh, which promised about a year ago to move forward very rapidly with providing formal education, formal accredited education in the camps. That was a promise that was made. And of course, it was going to do this with support from its international donors, who were also keen to support. But since then, I think things have gone quiet. And with everything that I've heard both Toon Kin and Yasmin tell us, the sad situation of so many young kids sitting in the camps not having formal education, this would be the best possible way to have them spend their time. It would prepare them for their future. It would help to have a more healing approach to the economy, to the community, which would, I think, fare a lot better if it's so that their own children were having access to a future. Because if they leave after 3 or 4 years, after it's for those who left in 2016, there were 80,000 of them, it's already 4 years. But for the others, it's 3 years and some months. After such a long time, it's important that this is now giving the highest priority. Secondly, second point relates to, I think it was what was Yasmin who spoke about the victim-centered approach and how it's important to hold victims close and to explain to them the medium to longer term. It reminds me of, a year ago today, when I find myself in Malaysia. By pure coincidence, I was there for a meeting with Rohingya women at a time that here in The Hague, where I'm speaking to you from The Hague, where the ICJ hearings were taking place. And spending time with those women, I really felt privileged that they included me as they followed the hearings. And it's a challenge to do justice to the full spectrum of emotions that unfolded. I won't even try, but in one of the follow-up discussions with them, we discussed return. And I asked them, well, if you could go back in 3 months and you would have sufficient time to prepare. Ultimately, you would have to address the question, what if I have returned to Northern Rakhine State and I run into some of the perpetrators, my former Rakhine neighbors, the members of the militia who did who committed such horrible crimes against us. If you knew that that might happen, would you go back? They unanimously said, no, absolutely no way, we would not go back. And that tells you that, a lot needs to happen in Rakhine State itself to make sure that there is a lot of healing. Now, there have been quite a few efforts to implement projects that deal with reconciliation and with social harmony, as they call it, but they all fall short because they exclude the critical actor in the debate, that is the government, because it's the government that's built an apartheid state that does not allow equality between the Rohingya and the other communities. So, but we are now, and I think we have to start looking at this, things are happening in Rakhine State. For a month now, the guns have stopped. I'm not holding too much hope. I'm very, very careful. But we've also heard of very initial careful discussions between members of the different ethnic communities, including the Rohingya, that deal with a common future and what that might look like. Now, again, I mean, the wounds are raw, the wounds are deep, and it will not be possible to overcome them that quickly. But we have to, I think, look at how we might be able to support these very careful explorations of the different ethnic communities themselves, of how they might move forward, because it's got to come from them. It's not going to come from the government, and that we know. And this is happening. Again, we have to be very careful, because before you know it, you might actually be making matters worse. But this goes back to the mandate that was in the mandate of the Anand Commission, the Rakhine Advisory Commission. Its mandate was to look at what needed to be done in order to allow a Rakhine state to develop where all communities would feel at home. And now that there is a slight opportunity when things are happening, I think this has to be looked upon, but critically, because we're not really sure what's happening, and before you know it, there could be further crackdowns. Now, let me, in addition, raise two other issues. The first is about sexual violence against men. Rohingya men and boys were also and are also among the victims. Of course, sexual violence against males in conflict settings in Myanmar has been very well documented. That includes the UN fact-finding mission that also spoke about it in the case of the Rohingya. The stigma among men can be even greater than among women, and this may prevent them from speaking up. And the undercounting of sexual violence against men, I think, remains a serious problem. And we have to make sure that when the issue of sexual and gender-related violence is raised, the situation of men is not implicitly, but explicitly included. I think that's a very important way forward. The second issue I want to raise that has not been given much attention, but that is becoming more urgent, that is the protection of witnesses in the context of alleged international crimes related to Myanmar. We have the 3 cases, 2 in The Hague, 1 in Argentina. And in the case particularly of criminal prosecutions, these prosecutions can stand or they can fail based on the willingness of witnesses to come forward and to tell their story in the courtroom. Now, if you look at the recent history of the ICC, and I have some experience with that, international witness protection is uniquely challenging. The court doesn't have its own territory, it doesn't have its own enforcement agency, and it works within a principle of complementarity in countries like Myanmar and others that are characterized by impunity and the absence of the rule of law. Moreover, Myanmar, as you know, is not a state party to the Rome Statutes, and it will not cooperate with the ICC. And this way will make it uniquely difficult to provide witness protection. After all, if cases are brought against Myanmar individuals, these are likely to include people in very high positions of power, and they will use the power that they have access to on a daily basis. They may be able to make full use of the state machinery to deal with witnesses and to silence them, be they inside or outside the country. We've seen that in other cases. One case I personally know very well is the case of Kenya. It happened. In the case of Argentina, if the prosecution goes ahead, similar concerns may apply. In the case before the ICJ is, of course, ICJ is not a criminal case. It is a case between parties, but it does cover issues of a criminal nature. The ICJ has very different fact-finding procedures and practices. It can hear experts and witnesses, but unlike the ICC, it does not have a witness protection program in place. In the case of Gambia and Myanmar, the Gambia has already produced a 500-page submission to the ICJ, which remains confidential, but it has been shared with Myanmar. While we, of course, don't know its contents, we cannot exclude that it may contain information that may, and perhaps unintentionally, point to individuals who are victims and witnesses. Even if they are unnamed, it may be possible to glean their identity from the overall context, putting people at risk, putting potential witnesses at risk. I know that I'm dealing with a lot of unknowns here, and I'm not an expert in this particular area, but I think that those of our friends who are engaging in international law and criminal justice, it's high time that they turn their attention to this important question. How is the safety and security of witnesses in the 3 cases before courts going to be guaranteed? Be they Rohingya witnesses, be they witnesses from outside the country, be they witnesses from other communities in Myanmar, thought has to be given to this important question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We will now turn to question and answer. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. I do not currently see any raised hands, so if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. Before I begin with the questions that we have, I will refer all attendees to the question and answer box. You will find there links to 2 different petitions that have been posted with information about those. And in the chat, there was a resource posted by Physicians for Human Rights. If whomever posted that link would like to repost it in the question and answer so it is easy for people to find it, that would be great. And with that, I shall turn to the question that we have. I will read it out loud and then I will give the floor to our panelists and we will get a response. Question is, various national jurisdictions such as Gambia and more recently Argentina are considering trials against the Burmese government under the universal jurisdiction of national criminal courts that is given by international law for cases of genocide. If the number of such trials keeps increasing, do you think that this might be enough pressure for the governments that support Myanmar to distance themselves from it and subsequently to not obstruct the deferral of the case of genocide to the International Criminal Court? I will look to see if either of our panelists indicates they would like to go first. I see a smile from Yasmin. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Here's one thing that I think is a bitter pill for us all to swallow, and I mean this with no disrespect at all, but nation states operate on its own self-interest, and often it is not operating on the basis of morality or ethics or human rights. If we actually dig deeper into why the global trend is that we are dealing with issues like, human exploitation of land resources, of the global climate change, all of this comes back to the idea that a lot of the human rights or ethics or morality in general are not profitable. And in order to make profits, in order for nation states to actually garner more power, more wealth, those have to come at a cost. Either it, be it human or natural resources or different other things, destabilizing of the communities or societies. The whole entire issues of justice and accountability, we can pursue that to the end of it. But if nation states actually are not forced to change their worldview, or they're not forced to face their own actions or the consequences of their own actions, like, for example, South Korea have sold arms to, arms ammunitions to the Myanmar military, South Korea, with North Korea next to it. As a democratic country, basing itself on the, sorry, not South Korea as a government, but South Korean companies. But that's also, through the international treaty. And why isn't there a limit when it comes to, mass atrocity, when it comes to government that are really risky in their ways of dealing with their own citizens, or the government that have tendency to harm their own people? There isn't enough of the accountabilities that different nation states are holding on, or holding each other accountable, because again, it is not profitable. If it is profitable for us all to promote human rights and live peacefully, we'd probably have a very different world. But coming back to the question is, there are so many stakeholders in making sure that the genocide goes as planned. And I'm using a very loaded term here, but China has a lot of skin in the game. A lot of other nation states do as well. China wants the access to the Bay of Bengal in order to exert its military might, or in order to exert its power overall in having that access. And we all know that the US does not quite like that. And there's this wrestle of, of power that is at play, but the human cost that involves Rohingya and many other ethnic minorities are the secondary to a lot of these problems. So having that knowledge or awareness is really important, and making sure that we instill that in a larger society and not just within the circle would be extremely, extremely important. It's essential that the rest of the world simply understand that genocide is, profitable, and that, there are a lot of actors that are involved that are hoping that genocide goes successful. I'm using the example of this, and I understand there are a lot of differences, but during the Nazi occupation, the Nazi Germany, there were a lot of profitable businesses that were booming during the time that millions of people were actually executed. People were tortured and oppressed. It is the same exact ways that this is played out. And I hope that when we sit down and look at how we could, affect changes, we look at this as a more systemic problems, and try to address it from that lens, connecting our personal problems to the larger institutions that are making it possible and enabling those things to happen. Crimes against humanity, mass atrocity, genocide are all within those category.
Thank you very much for that. Before I turn to Tun Kin, I will just direct everybody to the question and answer session where Physicians for Human Rights has posted their resource for those who are interested in that as well. I will give the floor back to Tun Kin in a moment. And after that, seeing no additional questions other than the broad question, which I think has colored our entire discussion, how do we stop genocide? I will turn the floor to concluding remarks, to Allison Smith from No Peace Without Justice. But before I do that, the floor is yours, Tun Kin, for final thoughts on the question we had. Your mic is muted.
I think, of course, these trials and these cases will take longer. What I remember is whenever I visited, and Yasmin and others, many here visited to the camps, unitedly one voice we heard from the camp genocide survivors is we want justice. I spent 4 weeks time when Rohingyas were fleeing from the country to Bangladesh, when their native land to the Bangladesh, and I witnessed how the horrific situation in my, I think the most horrific history I witnessed in my life, that is the time in 4 weeks time, 2017, September. So from women, from men, and from even children who are like 10 years, they want to bring those perpetrators, bring them to justice. So that's why one thing for the Argentina case, as a Rohingya organization, as a Rohingya ourselves, we tried as a victims, we filed that case to Argentina. We really want to see, because of course ICJ case is quite political, that case will hopefully is genocide or not, they will decide, and compensation issues and many things will come. ICC, that is a deportation case only, is quite limited. But for our case, in Argentina case, what we filed that is, especially including mostly horrific situation Rohingya face, where like Tulatuli, where at least where hundreds of Rohingya been killed in one day in Maungnu village in Butidang township, Tulatuli, Maungdaw township, and Godaping in Butidang township, where many Rohingya women were raped in front of their family members and killed and slaughtered in front of their fathers. That's what we have documented, and we have heard from those victims. So this Argentina case, UJ case, is quite broad, and on that case is quite highlight that terrific situation what's happened compared with those ICC case and ICJ case. So that case, when we file it, it has been already 1 year for Argentina case, and now ICC give green light already that is no duplication of Argentina case and ICC case, because Argentinian court thought is whether the same or not. So now, hopefully, I feel that in a few months' time or a few weeks' time, we probably can open investigation. So the point here, the question, these trials depends, same thing here coming up. how the governments will react. Same thing. We've been calling for targeted sanctions and military related companies. Here, the governments are not following UN fact-finding mission's resolution. UN fact-finding mission resolutions already called for military and military-related companies to take actions. And so, of course, these trials will make Burma such a shame in the international level, and governments, uh, we don't know how willingness international community governments will do that. So I believe that this will bring a stronger pressure when this case move forward in a few months time or in 1 or 2 years time. But that's why I mentioned earlier, and Yasmin also mentioned, the youth and genocide survivor rebuilding the community is much more important. It's going to take time. Governments with geopolitics, a lot of games here. But one thing what I want to point out here is, uh, we've been calling a stop funding a stop funding to our genocide, a stop selling equipment such as drones and information technology, to those who used to target and arm civilians in Burma, uh, Rohingya community organizations which played such a critical role in alerting the world to what's been happening to the Rohingya. We received very little, no support from ongoing documentation and other vital work. You know, even include our organization, we've been documenting human rights violations for 15 years now. We saw this is coming. We, along with our allies, raised this is at many international, many international conference, in forums. We, many state and company, they did not want to listen or take serious action. They continue to tolerate genocidal behavior, even partnered with perpetrators, those who profited from these crimes. So that's why I want to mention here is there is no excuse now. UN fact-finding mission in Myanmar urged international community to cut ties with the military and the vast web of companies it relies on. The mission said the revenues and the military earns from domestic and foreign business deals substantially enhance its ability to carry out gross violations of human rights with impunity. So that's why this international community today, they have to take serious action. Again and again, I was pointing out, like today you can see American companies and European companies and Asian companies are in various different ways doing business with the military. They are helping to fund genocide. And at the moment, that is legal. So targeted sanctions are really needed. Same time when we are looking at trials, other actions are also needed. As someone from a community, as a Rohingya subjected to ongoing genocide, I can clearly tell you that comprehensive targeted sanction and effective enforcement mechanism are what we need now. There is no choice since the international business community refused to take preventive actions before. Some governments have applied sanction on individuals, but that is not enough. I mean, like generals who committed genocide going to modify their action because some of its members are sanctioned individually. The evidence so far is no. So what I feel here, what I can see here is we have to look at quite wider angle. One-way trials, these things can make a difference. Of course, it takes time, and same time we need to those UN fact-finding mission recommendations and sanctions and military-related companies that much more government willingness and pushing these governments are really needed. That's what I want to point out. Thank you.
Thank
I
you
think
very much.
I took a different path again, I mean, instead of trial. So I just want to point out people more focus on trial. Of course, trials are legal, lawyers and governments are needed to push that. Same time, we really need to look other practical actions, what can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do now have two hands raised. I'm a bit mindful of time, so I will ask our two askers if you would to be brief, so we have time to respond to the questions and have closing remarks. With that, I will turn to the name is listed as ASMA Awal. The floor is yours, if you are able to unmute yourself. I see you've been elevated to a panelist, so if you could try to unmute your microphone, you should be able to speak. It appears as though you're speaking, but we are not able to hear. Could you try speaking again? Unfortunately, we are still unable to hear, so I'm going to turn to the next question. If you are able to test your audio in the meantime, I will return to you in a moment. So our second question, I see, oh, it's just moved. The second question, I'm sorry, has disappeared. Ferdowsi Begum, are you able to unmute yourself and speak?
Thank you, Miss. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I was a student of international law. This is not a question. This is an observation that I'm willing to make. That there is a if United Nations Security Council does not act in these circumstances of Myanmar, then we can opt for a mechanism of General Assembly resolution. It has been done in the name of the resolution was 377.5, and it was uniting for peace. So if United Nations Security Council could not be able to maintain the peace and security of the world, then we can go through the General Council resolution. And if we opt out for that, I think that that will work for Myanmar's recent solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will turn back to Mr. Awal to see if we are able to hear you. Could you try speaking? Unfortunately, you are still not audible. I will ask again to see if you're able to be heard. I'm sorry, sir. I can see that you're speaking, but we are not able to hear you. I will give it one more go. Unfortunately, we are not able to hear you. So what I shall do now is turn the floor to Alison Smith, who is the International Criminal Justice Director for No Peace Without Justice, to make some concluding remarks. And I would encourage you, Mr. Awal, to type your comment or question into the chat and see if we can't address it that way. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. And with that, Alison, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Melinda. I don't so much have concluding remarks as thanks to make. And first of all, I wanted to say a very large thank you to all of our speakers, and particularly to Yasmin and Tung Kin. As always, it's a pleasure speaking with you, and you've given us an enormous amount of food for thought. So thank you very much for your participation there. I'd also like to say thank you to the Embassy of Bangladesh to the Netherlands and to the other co-sponsors of this side event. As always, again, it's a pleasure for us to stand with you in support of our Rohingya colleagues. I want to thank everybody who is participating in this meeting online and everybody who is following it through the various social media networks. And just a reminder, it will stay on those networks if anyone's missed it, or if there's somebody that you know that you think should see this, please do pass on the links to them. Mr. Awal, are you able to speak now?
Hello.
Okay. Oh, then I will pause. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. If you were able to speak a bit more loudly, that would be great. We can hear you, but you're a bit faint.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Hello. Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very sorry. Maybe some disturbance over here. Thank you very much. It's a lovely discussion. I've heard a lot of points. Now, the subject of today, that's on the accountability for the sexual and gender based crimes. So we are all busy. We are all occupied with genocide and repatriation and all. And of course, the sexual and the gender-based crime is a key factor in this Rohingya genocide. But somehow this issue is not at the forefront. And what I can remember is so far only, I think, is in the even fact-finding mission. In their recommendation, they mentioned about the sexual and gender-based crime issue, and recommended for an ad hoc, criminal tribunal and referral to the International Criminal Court. Beyond that, I don't think this issue, though very vital, but it has not gone that much of prominence. And another issue I want to flag is, this year, 20th January, the all EU ambassadors in Myanmar and the head of missions, they made a statement where they mentioned about this ICG proceedings and the independent commission of inquiry formed by the Myanmar, which is a sham, inquiry. So that inquiry totally dismissed about the sexual and gender-based crimes. They dismissed that nothing has happened. Even they didn't find any evidence, and there were some evidence, there were hearings and all. And these EU ambassadors and head of the missions, they made the statement. In their statement, they mentioned that there is now the ICJ proceeding and the independent commission of inquiry report. So based on these, now we should go ahead without any criticism about the independent commission of inquiry report and its findings and the limitation it has, particularly about the sexual violence. So that is something I think the Rohingya reps you can hammer on, particularly the EU and these countries. They live on this human rights issue. They breathe. I'm sorry to use loaded words. They breathe on it. Please tell them that this is what you have done, where a commission of inquiry has totally dismissed this issue, and you have not mentioned that. And I'm also a little Human Rights Council has done a lot of things, but there is not much from Human Rights Council also about this independent commission of inquiry. They have just mentioned that there are some limitations. However, they wanted the full report to be published and ask the government to take action. So if that commission of report is given equivalence with the ICJ proceeding on other matters, so that is, I think, a dangerous thing. The Myanmar government will be happy to take some sham action on that, jail some people, and then pardon next day. And particularly this today's subject, the gender-based crimes and sexual abuse, that will be totally forgotten. So if you could flag this issue that about this commission report, that should be under international spotlight, and that should not be given any weightage in this whole proceeding. And I wish the Rohingya leaders here to form, as Dr. Imtiaz has mentioned, to your political movement through the diaspora. And you can go to the human rights, because human rights is the issue. The new US administration human rights is the hallmark for them. You can go to them and at least give one big country, one mighty country to file a case under the international jurisdiction. Because as you have mentioned, ICJ has one track, ICC has very limited scope. But if you can get one big country and have an international jurisdiction case, that will take the thing forward.
Thank
And
you.
last point I just want to make.
Yes.
I have heard about this, shifting to Bhashanchar connected to, less of food in the Rohingya camps. So please check your facts because, the Bangladesh is hosting million plus people. We did open our border where we have just, it is a burden on us, environment, security, economy, all burden we have taken. So whatever is being done to shifting to Bhashanchar, that's for the welfare and betterment of this Rohingya, ill-fated people. About the food issue, if there is less of food, even international organization, the supporting organization, they're all responsible for that, and we are also giving big money to that. So that can
Thank
be
you.
seen. But I have not heard this thing. Please check your facts. Otherwise, it may create a misunderstanding. And
Thank you, Mr. Awal. I
particularly
will ask you to
related
conclude, please. We
Yeah,
do
thank you very much.
finish the session. Thank you. I've noted from the comments that there are some participants who cannot see the question and answer box. So I will ask everybody who has posted a resource, whether a petition or a link to another resource, to please put it in the chat, just to make sure everybody is able to see the various resources that have been shared. And I will return the floor to Allison Smith for her thank you comments.
Thank you very much. I had actually finished saying my thank yous, although I'm extremely thankful to everyone, and particularly, as I said, to our speakers. I did just have one final thought that I wanted to share before we conclude today's session, and that thought is to Tunkin and to Yasmin and to all of our Rohingya brothers and sisters. I just wanted to say how much I am in awe of you and in awe of the work that you do and in awe that you can keep going and keep fighting the good fight for justice and for the victims. And it's just wonderfully impressive. So I wanted to say that. And I did also want to say, on behalf of No Peace, we will stand with you. And as we walk down this path together, please know you can count on us for whatever we can do to help. So thank you very much. Melinda, back.
Thank you, Allison. That was an excellent sentiment to end on. Thank you to all of our panelists for today. Thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you for the attendees and the questions and the comments. I see that we've had a request to share the petitions again in the chat. So if we could do that quickly, anyone who's interested in that, the link should come in a moment. With that, I believe this session is over. And again, we thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Yasmin and Tunkin, for your remarks. Always a pleasure to be on a panel with you.
Thank you very much.
Likewise. Take care.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
holiday. Take care, brother.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Thanks.